the university is an institution. Institutions, it's very hard to make them forget. Us, we're people. We're amorphous. We forget history if it's not taught or if it's not incentivized to be taught.
What I hope for these student movements, these student encampments, is that this sense of radicalization or challenging the status quo goes beyond the university. It goes into other parts of people's lives. Hello, everyone. We are on another episode of the Dugout, and today I just have to start this by saying, fuck 12.
The cops stopped a friend as well on the OSU's South Oval, and they only stopped them because they were wearing kufaya, and the cop literally said, like, we're just like kufaya and hijabs, or who they're walking up to.
Oh my god.
And yeah, that's it's a little bit of the scene here at OSU, in the city named after the colonizer himself, Columbus.
Talk about recent updates related to Palestine, a wide variety of campus protests that have been happening at different universities around the US and around the world, actually. And this has just been in the news over the past couple of days. Some of the bigger news has come out of Yale University, Columbia University. From checking social media right now,
This is Anti-Conquistador.
on the Anti-Conquista Instagram page, there is a post that has at least a number of the university occupations, including Columbia University, NYU, Yale, Emerson College, Massachusetts Institute of Tech, Tufts University, University of Michigan, and there's at least,
There's 12 at least there, and then more in the comments. People are letting folks know the University of New Mexico is popping off, the University of Austin, Texas, and like even Sydney, Australia. Also, fact check on my thing, Anti-Conquista, they do Latin American and Caribbean diaspora. So college campuses are in a bit of an uprise since, what did you say, like the past week or so? At least since April 15th. Past that, like that days of action really got spirits moving, people together, coalitions formed, and they're taking to occupying buildings and occupying area and space.
Okay, we're going to begin with New York University, with Professor Tawil Suri. You have been at the encampment since it began at NYU Monday morning at 4, and you just came from jail support where, over 140 people, including 20 of your peers, NYU professors, were arrested. Can you explain what's going on at NYU?
Yeah, sure. So the students decided to start an encampment yesterday, early in the morning, in support of Gaza, in support of Palestine, also kind of in support, obviously, of other students and Columbia and otherwise. And very early on, already from the very beginning of the first tent being set up, the NYU security guards came and NYPD came. But quickly, kind of a sort of de-escalation, if you want, kind of took place between faculty members and security guards, and NYPD left, and it was peaceful all day long. There was a lot of sort of negotiation back and forth between the faculty and the security guards on behalf of the students. And at some point in the afternoon, kind of, things like police presence was kind of escalating. And the negotiations kind of stopped, and at some point the NYU security guards were like, all right, well, they made it pretty clear that NYPD presence was just sort of imminent at that point, and kind of started coming up with all kinds of reasons as to why they were going to show up and so on, kind of kept pushing the bar in different directions. And then the NYPD came, faculty kind of had made a sort of front line kind of buffer zone at the very beginning. They were arrested very quickly. And then the police force kind of forced in their way into this sort of plaza where the students were where the students had their tents set up, and extremely violently kind of took down all the tents, were throwing chairs around, and then arrested all of the students that were there, and then also had a third wave of arrests of other people that were kind of still in that area as well. So yeah, 20 faculty members ended up in prison. were arrested, and I think the number of total arrests was around 140, 145.
I think this is an interesting and necessary kind of update in terms of how I look at the different tactics or responses to tactics happening in the U.S. I think about how a few months ago there were those university presidents, one Black woman who was the president of a big prestigious university who spoke out against the Israeli genocide of Palestinians, and she was promptly fired. This has happened at other universities, and there's been this overall larger discourse around freedom of expression, hate speech on college campuses. There are statistics that show that anti-Semitism has been on the rise. There are also plenty of people that support Palestine, Jewish or not, that are also speaking to the fact that freedom of speech is being challenged, repressed, student groups are being targeted, and in a lot of ways reminds me of Angela Davis's sentiment about how for her generation, the Vietnam War was their litmus test for revolution, for what the masses could be capable of. And for our generation, Palestine seems to be another example. And I don't know, I guess I want to hear why you were interested in doing this episode, because I do think we've been interested in doing more like timely or I guess reactive or just like, I guess, unpacking more immediate news on this. But why is this in particular of interest to you?
Things like this can be organized by whatever kinds of groups are at the forefront of movements and are like able to grab people's attentions. But the actual practice of occupying space and taking care of each other, it demands and it explores a politic and an emotional relationship and a sense of safety, and that births what I think can be a very loving and protective revolution. It gives us abilities to practice the things that we preach, put our money where our mouth is, see how much solidarity we can actually do. And it's kind of a test to see where local movements are for responses against state violence, against encampment sweeps, and against stuff like this. It's the kind of actions that begs the questions that we care so much about these camps getting swept. How much do we care about unhoused people getting swept? It's the kind of, especially because the established orgs that are going to be supporting actions like these in different locales are people that are like doing this work. They have tents, they have water, they have the infrastructure to get solidarity and make sure it actually gets put into revolutionary and militant movements in spaces. People are accepting that more and more with these Gaza encampments. Even at Colombia, which is one of the first, if not the first, I can't say off the top of my head, their president is Arab, Shafiq. And she was brought to the Congress with the president that you were talking about. And she got congressional pressure on her because the Congress was like, there are anti-Semitic attacks. And the anti-Semitic attacks are on the rise. And she felt pressured. She even brought a petition to like some sort of school governing body to bring the NYPD in. Staff and faculty all voted that down in that governing body. And she brought it in either way. She had to suspend students before actually evicting them from the campus to give them the trespassing that they wanted, which means those people couldn't get access to their dorms, their personal items or anything. And then just doing this overnight activity and really trying to care for each other's safety, our sustainability. Are we eating enough? Is everybody warm? Like, how are you feeling? Like, we just going through de-escalation solutions and going through escalatory solutions and trying to find what works for the spaces that we're trying to take and carve out.
And I'm glad you mentioned all of that in terms of the tactical opportunities that an encampment or an occupation can provide, because I'm thinking of actually 10 years ago. It's 10 years ago. 10 years ago was my last year of university, and this was when Michael Brown was killed. I think it was around August of 2014. And me and my friends on campus organized a walkout. And then that night we had, I think it was the night of the announcement of the results against the cop who killed Michael Brown. We did a occupation of our student center. And I remember we marched there. We were just gathering. The university came and they basically demanded that we leave. And we voted together to hold space. And we stayed. The administration was there trying to talk us down. There were some people that were worried about their scholarships. There were some people that were like, fuck our scholarships. Fuck you, university. And they wanted to stay. And to your point, it was interesting because that was my first experience being someone that was hosting an event that escalated into a different tactic, and those politics of care did matter. And I'm really looking at that night as kind of the start of my own individual radicalization process, because that was when I was able to see like, oh, I can present or be a part of a tactic that pushes people in a space. And that is something that can make you a leader to other people, or it can push you forward, or it makes the work become more necessary because you understand that you have this capacity that you've exercised in the past.
Yeah, we've done occupations at OSU before of like Bricker Hall, and a lot of them we end up voting to leave. And people have faced academic scrutiny and academic probation, mainly from the Palestine organizing that's been happening the past couple months. At actions that aren't even at OSU, cops are like making sure to write down names of students, and then they'll bring it to the university. Or as soon as if we're marching, and as soon as we enter OSU, that's when they're really like talking to every person on a bike, like, what's your name? What's your number?
Yeah.
I'm going to arrest you. If you're a student, I'm going to make sure you lose everything.
Some of the demands that are out there among student encampment protesters here in Ohio, there are students at Ohio State University who have started an encampment on April 25th. And some of the demands range from financial divestment, identify, cease, and or prohibit investment and or relationships with companies complicit in documented ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, an academic boycott that cuts ties with Israeli academic institutions. And some other demands are financial disclosure, ensuring transparency with staff, faculty, and students regarding the university's investments and endowments, acknowledge the genocide, issue a public statement, end targeted policing, which includes the suppression of Palestinian students and their supporters. And these are very common demands. These are very necessary. I think these encampments are kind of bridging from the model of BDS, which is boycott, divest, and sanction, which is a movement that has been going on, I think, for decades, targeting different Israeli companies and institutions and how they reach into other countries, other places in the world. And it's targeting this economic relationship, which I think is so important. And that's where I think student organizing is an interesting place for people to be radicalized, and a very useful place, because who else? I mean, everyone can be a threat to the economy, but I think the young adult, the person who hasn't fully entered the working force, they present a very particular threat, because universities are essentially operating as businesses. They take students in, they overcharge you, they give you these fucked up diluted politics depending on what major or what department that you're in. Some departments preach about human rights or teach you about history or about racial justice issues, but when moments like this come up, institutions, professors, administrators, faculty members are silent. And so in a lot of places, it's necessary, I think, especially on university campuses, to have visible opposition to the status quo, because it kind of lets people that are going there just to get their degree know that there is actual human life and struggle, whether socially, culturally, politically, happening on this campus. And so I'm glad that this is highlighting that. And it's also like university, like these kinds of things. I'm also interested in how the news of these things travel around a city, or the discussions that people getting arrested who are in university are going to have with their families back home.
I think a lot about students and their families back home, and this might be a tangent that we cut, but this is what I love and hate student organizing. And it's because like there are a lot of working class students, and I also think this is what makes encampments and occupations so beautiful, is that everybody gets to feel at some point kind of there's more chance for an egalitarian through line to come in. It doesn't matter that once you're done with this degree, you're going to make 70, like 80K a year. Or once you go home for the summers, you go back to Dublin. Like right now, right here, we live on the grass. We live in this building as comrades, as a community. And that's what I think really is a point of radicalization for a lot of people, and why student movements can be so powerful to break down so many years of culturally taught and regionally taught things that are just class-based, that keep student movements behind. Because I'll be honest, a lot of students LARP poor, and as soon as they're out of college, like, oh, back in my days, I used to be revolutionary, blah blah blah, or maybe they're less this now because they don't feel the struggle as much, and they felt that class antagonism most when they were a student, when their parents stopped giving them money for things before they were able to get that degree and make their own money. That was like sometimes high paying, sometimes not. It really depends, like, yeah, what major you're in, what kind of politics they're shoving down your throat. And these are the things that disrupt the status quo and let people know that, no, there's a revolutionary movement happening in the United States. We are a part of it. Here's how we're defining it. And do you want to join us? We'll make space for you. We'll make space for you to learn. We'll make space for you to teach. What can we do to grow together?
I'm thinking of takeaways from this conversation I'm hoping that people have who will listen. One question I have is, what is your response to this discourse about out there around hate speech on campuses? And we have to make sure hate speech isn't a part of the conversation, and this sort of institutional claim that pro-Palestinian protests are inherently hate speech. And I guess I wonder, how do you confront that talking point when it comes up in a conversation with people?
With the reality that Jewish and Palestinian hate crimes have been on the rise since October 7th. I don't mean like them getting hate crimed. And then the question there to ask is, did they feel safe before? Did Black students feel safe before? Do they feel safe now? With all this sort of militarization, because of this supposed like heightened of hate speech, which there is through individual vigilante action, but not organized hate speech at these rallies. At least the ones that I'm going to, the ones that SJP and Just and PLM are hosting, calling for an end to genocide, not another genocide.
Even if we do want to acknowledge that hate crimes, hate speech, anti-Semitism, anti-Palestinian sentiments have been on the rise, I think I follow up the question of who has institutional support these instances of hate or violence addressed. And I do think, because of the state of Israel and Zionism and Israeli lobbying and the attachment of Zionism to U.S., especially public universities or universities all around the world, frankly, there is more of an institutional drive to favor the voices of Zionist students who are claiming anti-Semitism when it's simply a critique of the state of Israel and its continuous war crimes. And even if you look at like what Palestinian students are going through, or various Middle Eastern students who support the Palestinian struggle for liberation, where's their support? And what historical pattern have we seen of these voices being ignored? And so I think the hate speech discussion becomes one twisted in that way. But then I also think of the other side to I think you were kind of getting at this about how talking about hate speech or saying that hate speech is on the rise, it incentivizes universities to bring in more state violence. It incentivizes them to bring in more police, more military. It says we need the cops there in order to make sure that people are safe. And then usually you look at the videos from the next day at these encampments, and it's cops beating the shit out of people, throwing them to the ground, instigating and escalating situations like people saw on OSU's campus today, because there's an encampment that happened earlier. And as far as social media and various reports from this, within like an hour or two, numerous cop cars were there. It was said that there were like up to 6 cop cars there.
Three people were arrested.
3 people were arrested. And because like the state is setting the standard of violence, but they're placing the blame of the violence on the citizen, on the protester. And I think that is an interesting and very real kind of shift or turn for people to experience when they're being in solidarity with Palestinians who are experiencing the same thing, but where they live all the time under an apartheid state. And so, I don't know, it's interesting to me how solidarity work basically can show you who the state is. It reveals their truer intentions if you actually look at it.
More than enough reason to believe that we are already in a war, or that the wars that we have been fighting in for years for liberation have never ended. Quote unquote, not exactly like the Palestinian liberation movement that has been fighting for years. And to be in solidarity with a movement like this, we have to know where we are in the empire, what we can do, and what we can affect. These encampments targeting divestment and ceasefire so that less people are dying and there's less chance for occupation to be heightened, and if anything, de-escalated. That is a key component to making sure that when we get wins, they are not able to co-opt the movement as a whole. There will always be co-optation. That is the strategy. The state has media, the state has press, the state has propaganda. It's not even just the state. There's other cultural movements that are vying for power at any time that we exist. We are all autonomous human beings that decide to make collectives and then do something about things that we care about. And there's a precedent for this. And like you were saying, with the Vietnam War, these student occupations happened before. The university is an institution. Institutions, it's very hard to make them forget. Us, we're people. We're amorphous. We forget history if it's not taught or if it's not incentivized to be taught.
And with universities, there's such a high turnover rate. So you can have a movement 5 years ago and students now on campus are like, who was that?
The effectiveness of our next movements means laying off of tactics based off arrest. It means laying off of tactics that we formed in the 90s and early 2000s. I'm not saying they're all useless. We lean too heavy on them and we forget their roots and why we had to do those. And that's because we had insurrectionary movements in the 70s and 80s.
Well, can you specify what those tactics are to you from that period of time that we're still relying on?
Mass mobilization of rallies that are marches. That kind of, to me, is like where we're at a standstill. But that being said, mass mobilization is not the issue. It's the lack of threat. We are not threatening them by just coming out in force. Now they just know our faces, how many we have. It's a scouting thing for them. They can just go there and get some information, and they get more information on us. And then we get to build affinity, which is beautiful. But one thing you can do with that affinity is do something about it, like occupy a building. That's a mass mobilization. And that is beautiful. That is also like a 90s, early 2000s protest tactic. That's or anti-globalization, the Battle of Seattle, Oka crisis. That's like so many things like rely on like blockading. That's any revolutionary moment and movement. But there's also offensive positions. An offensive position in something like this moment is taking these spaces in these buildings and making sure that things financially do not stay sustainable for those, or culturally don't stay sustainable. There is a hegemony. There is a control. There is a control that institutions want to have over populations, and they use it through narratives, and they have access to communicate with every student at any time they want to. At that point, we need to be in either multiple places. It's harder to stop 10 or 5, 100 people occupations. It's harder to stop 5 or 10.
It's harder to stop 10 hogs that are running around town on their own versus it's easier to stop 10 hogs that are running around town together. 10 hogs together are easier to catch. 10 hogs separately running around town are harder to catch.
These are the tactics of like the 70s and 80s insurrectionary revolutionary moments. If the word insurrection scares you and the word revolution doesn't, do some study. Because we need to have this attitude, because we need to examine the attitude of past movements that brought the war home and knew what it was meant to be in solidarity with people who were being massacred, genocided, and completely disregarded. People who found inspiration from John Brown, Nat Turner, rebellions all over for liberation. That is where our study should be, because we have so much history. We are not reinventing anything, and I know all of us know this, but there's so much more for everybody to find out about because of the repression of these movements. That history is hidden from us. We have forgotten. The state hasn't. The institutions haven't. And it's our communal duty. It's my communal duty, especially as someone who's interested in all of this and can do all the reading and likes to distribute information and do all this, to make sure that folks are able to converse about it. And everybody has different memories of movement spaces, or they have different histories or different relations to certain revolutionary histories are informative. And then there's a dialogue happening. And what we're doing there is creating something new and appropriate for our day and age and locale.
To me, radical work, like work that is both challenging to the institutions around us and ourselves. To me, the most radical work I've done, it's almost been to the point where I know if I'm going to do this shit, it's going to change my class position, or it's going to change the trajectory of my world politically in some way. And I guess this is to your point about like people joining movements when they're in university and then they graduate and they get a job and blah blah blah, and they're like, "Oh, back when I was radical." And I guess I'm thinking about how when I graduated, I sort of made myself a commitment, like I want to figure out how to be an adult that is an anti-capitalist, participates in labor in a way that is like politically dignified, or I don't know, is aligned with me being aware of my own exploitation on a certain level, and how that made certain jobs that could have earned me more money less possible. And how I think what I hope for these student movements, these student encampments, is that this sense of radicalization or challenging the status quo goes beyond the university. It goes into other parts of people's lives. And I guess I'm also like searching in this conversation for like takeaways or things that I would maybe hope to offer people that are actively a part of these encampments, who might be in university, who are engaging in it. This is a moment, but to your point, this is also a part of a movement. And I think if people really want to be against genocide, really want to be against all of the fucking complicities that our country is a part of in relation to Israel, real revolutionary work is like risking something. It's risking some aspect of your privilege, especially being in university in the US. The amount of resources it takes to get there in comparison to so many other parts of the world, it's like there's a lot of shit that I think university students can throw down on. Like, of course, that's based on like your status in terms of being documented or not in relation to the government of
Yeah,
the
and it
US.
doesn't mean risk everything.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean get rid of your life. It means take risks that you know make you feel authentic politically, and
that challenge you. And this is a part of a bigger moment. The US has just agreed to give another $15 billion in aid to Israel. Netanyahu and the Israeli government and the IOF have talked about, it's literally in the news right now, that they're planning to invade Rafah. They're claiming that they're going to expand the humanitarian zone for Gazans to move out of Rafah so they can go in, which is their claim that they're targeting Hamas. This is going to continue, and Palestinians are going to suffer. And I think the more that people are engaged and understand that these systems are interconnected outside of the university, outside of the administration, in terms of our politicians, in terms of the media, in terms of news, I think the more we realize that there are so many parts of our lives that we can transform, look at, make changes in. And maybe to your point, like, I don't think it always has to involve like arrest or in the street on the front lines, because we all have different proximities to violence. But I do think it's like there are all these systems all around us that deserve confrontation in terms of their complicity.
yeah, and we got to keep going hard and going hard for each other as well. There's one thing to remember, is that these movements for liberation are autonomous, but they're interconnected, can be organized. They can self-organize. But one thing that these encampments and occupations very much make clear is that no one owns the movement. Org centralization is not going to be the solution, because it's not even the answer to our immediate problems. But that doesn't mean confederation isn't. That doesn't mean organizing with each other isn't the solution. We must. And we must all come together with all of our ideas. And we're going to have differences. But just because someone else is doing something else doesn't mean you can't do something else as well. Spread the police's resources thin. I love what you said earlier. 10 hogs. 10 hogs running around. It's easy to catch when they're with themselves.
Where do you hope these encampments go? What do you think they show or prove to people? If I'm answering my own question, I hope these encampments show people the truth of the state and their willingness to enact violence on people expressing their freedom of expression. 1. 2, I hope that exposure to that violence brings together broader coalitions of people who are willing to go in, support, give supplies, maybe form encampments in other areas or committees or whatever it is. Like, I love the occupation model where the initial encampment grows and spreads, and there are these other kind of, I don't know, I guess working groups or things within it that like give it a larger kind of impact. And then I think beyond that, looking at ways that these encampments are an opportunity for groups of people to change their structural relation to an institution. Because what I always think is interesting and fucking lame about universities is whenever you make a demand about their investments or money or anything, they're always like, it's such a complicated process. Like, it's not that easy. We can't just sign a piece of paper. And I'm like, you can sign a fucking piece of paper for anything else. And so I think in that way, it's like demanding that the decision-making process behind these institutions that are publicly funded, that are being funded by our tax dollars as citizens of blah, 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 this country, it's like changing that relation, I think, is a very important thing because it essentially pushes the masses to democratize education on some level. And that to me is like a very important goal because universities fucking suck and I don't think they should be corporations. And I like the idea of an occupation or an encampment movement really doing the work to make that change in relation more and more possible over time.
And there are faculty that support this as well. There's a whole faculty for Justice of Palestine. And I think, yeah, the broad coalition of this coming together, the decentralization of tactic and of planning, while still having points of unity, like having this council commune model, having the ability to do this, do something replicatable. Which, as we've seen, this is replicatable. It doesn't mean you're not risking a lot, but you can't do it. And they won't get us all. And if they do, they won't get us all forever. Bring the war home.
Bring the war home. That's a phrase from the Weather Underground. Bring the war home. Okay, thank you everyone for listening. We are going to give more updates on things that are happening locally and nationally in your little town. Go out and do your little thing. Have some fun, if you know what I'm saying.
Check out our Instagrams for some resources for street mobilization, encampment, and occupation. Our Instagram is at the Dugout Media.
If you want to support us financially, you can check out our Substack. We post show notes there, episodes, so you can get even more detailed resources on things that we cover in these episodes. And by paying, you support us in editing and posting these episodes of The Dugout. But until next time, go out and support Palestine.